function so that kids can learn more about the history of our city. You've all asked, all groups have asked for an oral update on cycling fatalities, and I'm going to go through that quickly if I may, because I know everybody will want to come back with questions. The first point is the one I've made many times over the last few days, which obviously is that one death is one too many, and we obviously our thoughts are with the victims, with their families, those who love them and care for them. It is also important to stress, and this is a difficult point to make when people are mourning, but it is very, very important to stress that the spate of fatalities that we've seen in the last couple of weeks must be seen in the context of an overall decline in fatalities. And just to, I was challenged on the radio yesterday by a guy from a cycling group who said that the number of fatalities since I've been mayor over the last, getting on for 6 years, he said was about 80, or 80, it's actually 81 from 2008 to 2013. But if you look at the previous 6 years, it was 102. And if you look at the 5 years, for instance, between 2008 to 2012, of my mayoralty, there were 68 cycling fatalities on the roads in London. The figure between 2003 and 2007 was 82. So whichever way you cut it, you are looking at a reduction in the number of fatalities over identical periods of time, but you're also looking at a very, very considerable increase in the volume of cycling. And that is the key point that I think people also sometimes forget. So I know that is a hard point to make in this context, and I know that people don't always listen to it, and I doubt very much that it's difficult to expect that point to be broadcast in these circumstances. But I do think it is important to make. It is statistically, it is getting safer to cycle. Your journey is less likely to end in a fatality. But it is very, very important to continue to work to make cycling ever safer. And there is a huge amount of work that we are engaged on at all sorts of levels. And obviously, when you look at the what's happening on the roads, you've got to look at the role of HGVs, and you've got to pursue the scheme that we've got at the moment, for instance, to make sure that all HGV vehicles entering London are properly equipped with safety, the features that we would want to see. And we're consulting on that now. We want to create a safer lorry zone in London. I'm sure the Assembly is fully
If you could bring
aware.
your comments to a close now.
I just want to make a couple more points, if I may. Darren, we are also, of course, investing massively in cycling infrastructure. And the third point I would like to make, obviously, is that it is absolutely vital that all road users respect the rules of the road as far as they can. And just to repeat the key and salient data, which is, I think, getting slightly lost, although we bitterly regret the recent spate of fatalities, it is vital to stress that overall the number of deaths we are seeing on London's roads from cycling is coming down.
Thank you. I will take questions from groups on cycling first, and then if there are any questions on other matters of the Mayor's oral update, we'll come to those.
Thank you.
So, Assembly Member Pidgeon.
Mr. Mayor, at the Cycling Vision launch last week, Transport for London proudly explained how they took just 18 months to install a cycle lane on a really straightforward bit of road. 18 months. London can't wait 18 months for you to correct some of the issues on Cycle Superhighway 2 and some of the other dangerous junctions in London. What are you going to do to speed up this urgent work on the highway?
Well, we are doing an awful lot, and as I say, I think it's very, very important to continue with the Cycle Superhighway programme. We are not going to be deflected from that. I mean, there are people out there who would like to use this the current spate of accidents as a justification for saying that we should have fewer cyclists on the roads. I absolutely reject that approach. I will not be deflected from our course, which is to encourage more cycling in London. And to that end, we will continue to invest in the transport infrastructure that we need.
But it's how long it's taking,
to give you an example
how long
of
it's taking. 18 months, maybe fast for traffic engineers. It's not fast enough for ordinary Londoners who want to be cycling
Yes.
but want to cycle safely. So
Sure.
what are you doing to speed up the works that are urgently needed on the roads in London?
Well, you know, to give you a couple of examples, we are from next year we will be constructing a cycle superhighway from Elephant and Castle over Blackfriars to King's Cross, which will be very largely segregated. It will be an extraordinary new cycle superhighway for London. As you know, we're also consulting now on the east-west cycle superhighway, which will run more or less from the city along the embankment up through to the Westway. It will be the longest continuous urban cycle superhighway in Europe. And you know, you ask what I personally am doing. Well, I would just point out that I can't remember how long you've been serving on this assembly, Carol. I think it's just you came in when I did. But you know, there were no cycle superhighways at all during a period in which cycle fatalities were running at a much higher rate. And I humbly point out that actually, if you look at our record over the last 5 years, we have shifted heaven and earth to get these things installed. They are not easy to do.
I'm not sure you
they
have,
cause...
Mr Mayor. It's not fast enough, and that's the issue. 2 years ago, we talked about reviewing dangerous junctions in London. We've seen a handful of changes put in place. I think you, as Chair of Transport for London, need to make sure the officers there start working at the pace that Londoners want them to, rather than in their traffic engineer world that seems to take years and years for the smallest change to happen.
If I must reject completely what you say, because I think they've worked extremely fast and extremely well. And it is very easy to put in substandard or inadequate schemes and then be forced, because they've been badly researched and badly thought through, to take them out again. That is not what we want to do, and we want to make sure that what we do lasts and produces genuine improvements for London. I think I know that others will want to come in.
Mr Mayor, you need to start taking some responsibility here and getting things to be done quicker where they can be safely for cyclists in London. Thank you,
I appreciate
Chair.
that you need to try to score points about this, Caroline.
It's
but
not scoring points.
I really think if you look at the
this.
record and you look at what we have done over the last 5 years, I really don't think anybody could credibly say that we have not put cycling safety and put cycling at the forefront of our ambitions. And to the best of my knowledge, there were no cycle superhighways before I became mayor. I'm pleased that we're getting on with the programme and we're getting on with them as fast as
Well, we'll get into the detail, I think, in December at Transport Committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Jones.
Thank you, Chair. You keep talking about the deaths, but you are ignoring the figures on the seriously injured. And the fact is, cycling is not getting safer in London. These are your figures, Mr Mayor. In 2008, when you were first elected, on average, a cyclist could do over 400,000 cycle trips before being killed or seriously injured. In 2011, 3 years after your smoothing traffic flow and changing traffic lights and so on, the average cyclist could only make 364,000 trips before being killed or seriously injured. Cycling is not getting safer.
Well,
you've been asking me to apologise for 2 years for saying that. Now I'm going to ask you, I don't want an apology, but I think you should apologise to the families of the victims.
I think you should apologise for your continual scaremongering.
Seriously injured
how
on
often,
the roads.
Jenny?
If you let Jenny Jones finish her question first, then you can come in. Assembly Member Jones.
Thank you. I'd like you to apologise to the families of people who've been killed and to the people who've been seriously injured on the roads because of your flawed and quite dangerous policies.
Well, I think it's very striking that you sat in this assembly, to the best of my knowledge, for the 8... I think you were there.
Could
for
you
the whole...
answer the question rather
I think
than
you
just...
were there when cycle fatalities were running at a much higher rate. I don't believe that you protested then. I don't believe that you said anything then. I think you should apologise to Londoners for your inertia your silence and your refusal to stand up for cyclists.
I'd like to say, Mr Mayor, that I was the first person to mention road safety in this chamber and cycling in this chamber, and I have worked hard all of my political career to make the roads safer. Your comments are outrageously incorrect, and you do now owe me an apology.
Well,
Let me get back to my original question. Will you apologise to the families of those who've been killed and to the people who've been seriously injured because you've made the roads more dangerous?
Well, I reject what you're saying. I think if you look
These
at
are your figures, Mr Mayor. They're not my figures, they're your figures, TfL figures.
If you look at what's happening on the numbers of people being killed,
I'm not
on our
talking
roads,
just about people being killed.
indeed,
I'm talking about the seriously injured as well.
If you look at what's happening on the number of people, even the number of people being injured, actually the rate is admittedly we have a larger number of people currently being injured, and I am concerned about that. But that is, I think, a function of the huge increase in the number
No.
of cyclists.
I'm talking average trips.
And
that takes into account the extra numbers. All right, let's move on to the fact...
I think if you were being honest with Londoners, you would actually apologise for your continual scaremongering about cycling, and you pretend to be a fan of cycling, and you pretend to stick up for it. All you do, in my view, is try to terrify people about the state of our roads. Of course there is a risk involved in cycling.
He is being personally quite offensive
everybody
and
understands
inaccurate, Chair.
that.
Can you please ask
Everybody
him
understands
to
that
withdraw
there's
his
a
remarks?
risk. What we've been
Can
doing
you ask him
is
to withdraw his remarks
very
of personal
considerably
nature?
reducing that.
Do that as your question.
Mr Mayor, let me move you on to the fact that you've been blaming the victims. Now, back in October 2011, I asked you about the rising number of child and pedestrian casualties, because there are a lot of pedestrians dying and being seriously injured as well. I asked you about them, and you blamed handheld devices for the rise. You didn't have any evidence at that time, but you've had 2 years now, and you're still talking about headphones and so on being a danger. Where are the statistics? Do you have the figures from TfL on that
Well, okay, let me just say something about
Do you
that
have the
conversation.
figures? Do you have the figures on how many of these collisions are caused by people wearing headphones? I asked you this 2 years ago.
We
do you
don't-
have the figures?
In fact, if we do have any such data, I'd be happy to share it with you. But I think
Then
it's important.
what are you basing your comments on?
I'll tell you what I'm
Blaming
basing my comments on.
victims.
No, I'm not blaming the victims. I do think in a mature society where it's perfectly obvious that accidents on the roads are caused by many factors, you should be able to, and if I remember correctly, yesterday we had a long conversation on the radio which was mainly about what we were doing to stop lorries from turning left in such a way as to catch cyclists unawares, what we were doing to make cyclists more aware of lorries turning left. That was what the discussion was about, what we were doing to make lorries safer. I was then asked a throwaway question at the end about headphones, and I mentioned my view, which is that I think it is dangerous for cyclists to have headphones on whilst they cycle, and I think that it in London traffic.
What about it being dangerous when cars go into advanced stop lines? And, you know, there are lots of factors. You can't pick on one factor.
I didn't pick on, but that's if I may say. I mean,
Mr. Mayor,
really
you are being
ought to
very
be,
offensive
I think
today,
most
and you're
people,
being blind to
most
the
people
causes of the
listening
problems.
to this would
Part of them
say
is your
that it is
policies.
entirely reasonable in the context of collisions between motorists, HGV drivers and cyclists. It's entirely reasonable of us to focus on what we can do to make HGVs safer. But I think people would also feel the conversation was inadequate if we didn't draw attention to the additional responsibility of cyclists, Jenny, to be sensible and to obey
He's
the
wasting
rules
my time.
of the
Could you
road.
please shut him up? He's wasting my time.
I'm going to let the Mayor continue.
If you
This is the
seriously
question.
disagree with that, then I think that you need your head examined.
You
Because,
blame victims. Can you stop being so offensive? What is the matter with you?
I'm so sorry.
What is the matter? Why are you being so personally rude? Why can't you stick to the topic?
Well, I don't intend to be personally rude, Jenny. If I've
But you
been
have
personally
been.
rude to you, obviously I'm very sincerely apologetic. I just sometimes feel that you're not entirely civil to me.
I'm talking about your policies, not about your personality.
And, you know, I reserve the right to answer back in kind. And, you know, we are doing a huge amount to
Repetition.
invest in the roads. We are doing a huge amount to make our transport system safer. What I don't think anybody in this city can conceivably ignore is the simultaneous, parallel, additional duty of cyclists to behave responsibly. Now, if you're saying that that duty does not exist, then I'd like you to assert that now. Are you saying that the cyclists have no such duty?
I'm here to ask the questions, not you. He's wasting my time.
Well, I think you're wasting
Chairman.
everybody's time.
I think
in my view, Jenny.
I think that exchange has
wasted our time for quite long enough. It's high time you went off to the House of Lords, where you belong, and wasted their time.
You're just jealous.
On the contrary.
Assembly Member Biggs.
Thank you, Chair. And following from Jenny Jones' point, I think there's an underlying problem, which is that too much of our cycling policy is written by what I call gung-ho alpha males, and it is at risk of creating road conditions which are not safe for people who are not of that disposition. For the record, the safest cycle superhighway, which runs through my constituency, in my experience, I may be wrong on this, but it's Cycle Superhighway 3, which was built under your predecessor, and when you were elected, it's quite a good piece of superhighway. You changed the colour of the tarmac, and I think we should celebrate the fact that it's not a trivial point. We should celebrate the fact that cycling is being better catered for in London, but there are still some very, very serious problems.
Well, I think I would agree with that.
Right, and the serious problems. I want to speak particularly about Cycle Superhighway 2. And the little bit of Cycle Superhighway 2 between Aldgate and the Newham border, 6 people have lost their lives in 3 years, in less than 3 years on that piece of road, and it's scandal. I mean, it's outrageous that not enough has been done to deal with that. I met with you and the widow of one of the first victims in your office over 2 years ago, and we talked about the measures that needed to be taken. Time and again, TfL, what I call the dead hand of TfL and their bureaucracy, have said, no. Road priority is such that we can't give the time at these important junctions to make it safe for the more vulnerable users. And I think that's a very severe indictment. You have to respond at present to a coroner's letter, which you can't comment on, I guess, because of the legal process. But there is an urgent need for you to shake up TfL and get them to recognise that the sacrifice of motorist time is a price worth paying for the safety of vulnerable road users. Do you accept that?
Well, on Cycle Superhighway 2, we have put in a massive new, entirely segregated section, which I hope you appreciate and have personally inspected. I'm sure
the bit that's just opened in Newham. Yeah.
And the Bow roundabout, which I think the issue that you're particularly concerned about, John, we have made a huge effort to transform that roundabout, and it goes back to what I was saying a moment or two ago, I think to Caroline, who was saying, get on with it, do more, it is easy to put in things that are inadequately researched and don't stand the test of time. We were urged, for instance, to put in a cycle-only traffic light at Bow, which indeed we have, and in my view, looking at it and the operation of that traffic light, and the cycle, the segregated stretch that goes behind the bus stop and so on, you have to ask yourself whether there is a risk of over-engineering some of these solutions, and I'm afraid that I'm not absolutely convinced, and that you can always produce nirvana without actually producing a situation in which the signals are too confusing, and it is very, very difficult to get this right. What we have is a situation in which you have vulnerable road users in the form of cyclists on that stretch of road who are mingling in the traffic with very, very dangerous large vehicles. And there is no very easy solution for this. If there was, believe me, we would have done it. One thing you could do is construct individual flyovers for the cyclists. You could totally segregate out, and you could construct cycling flyovers.
I think you see,
I'm not convinced. I mean, it would be expensive.
I don't think the answer.
And very expensive. But I'm perfectly prepared to contemplate. The other thing I hold in the back of my mind as a regular cyclist is that I'm not convinced that every cyclist would use it. Because what would happen is that they would come to this moment when they have the option of sticking on the ground.
But I think,
and if I can just continue the point, because it's a very, you're asking a serious point.
Yes, absolutely.
They have the option of sticking on the ground and saving time and exercising their rights as road users and going with the traffic, or they have to puff and pedal right the way up onto a new safety feature that I'm afraid many of them might choose to ignore. So, unless you said that cyclists were to be compelled to use that safety feature, and again you'd then be starting to erode what I think is the right of cyclists to use all stretches of the road in London, and that's not a route that I want to go down. What I'm trying to get at is that the answers that people regularly put forward, when you dig into them, are not as easy, not as straightforward as all that. Much more needs to be done. Much more needs to be done to educate cyclists, to educate HGV drivers, and of course, much more needs to be done to invest in our roads.
I do agree that those things are important. Viewers need to understand that we have limited time, which is why we try to interrupt you on long answers, and I do respect your lengthy answer. There is a solution. I'm a world expert on the Bow Roundabout now. I've been there so many times with transport officers, with cycle campaigners, with local politicians. I've tried to understand it. I've had meetings in my office. I've had meetings in your office.
I know.
Because 3 people have lost their lives there. And there is a solution. It might be quite expensive. It might require us to do quite a lot of work. And there are interim solutions which will make it safer as well. And I think that's a price worth paying.
Well, John...
I would ask you, in your authority as Chair of Transport for London, to instruct that we go further to make that junction safe.
Yes,
there is a...
Can I just say that it's in my heart too to do that? I mean, completely. And I look at Bow as a...
Okay.
I want it to be safe. But exactly what you do there... I take that as a exactly what you do there is wrong. But I just for the benefit of...
We'll just let the Mayor finish that answer.
There's one vital point.
Interrupted me, Chair.
I'm so sorry, John, but there's one vital point that I think
there are many vital points, but
people should know about Bow and about that east-west stretch generally in the Hackney, Newham, Stratford area. We are going to be opening up quiet ways, additional quiet ways, so people who don't want to be on that stretch of road, who find the idea of the Bow Roundabout too challenging, we will make sure that there are additional quiet ways, and that possibility is opened up by what we're doing in the Olympic Park and the routes we can create there.
Thank you. Assembly Member Biggs.
Thank you, Chair.
You've concluded.
I'm
okay, thank you. Assembly Member Tracy.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr Mayor, I don't know whether you know, but in the last half an hour or so, Chris Boardman, the well-known Olympic cyclist, has actually said that he thinks you are taking very positive steps to deal with this problem. But he also asks when or how you're going to proceed to the idea of perhaps limiting heavy lorries and tippers particularly, during the peak hours, when, of course, the maximum number of cyclists are on the road.
Absolutely.
Can I just continue? There are 2 other things. One is, when are we going to see far more lorries with audio warnings on them, such as one does encounter in the city and in certain trucks going around, because that must be a positive step.
Absolutely.
And the last thing, to what extent are cyclists insured? Because Jenny Jones has raised the ones that are injured rather than those unfortunates that are actually killed on the roads. But what about proper insurance for cyclists?
Well, on the tipper trucks, which is the big issue for us, there's no question that a disproportionate number of fatalities involve HGVs. and big vehicles of all kinds. And that's why we're consulting on a safer lorry zone in London. It may be that as part of the safer lorry zone, we will insist on lorries having an audible I'm turning left, I'm turning left, I'm turning left function. It would also be useful, therefore, if cyclists could hear that function. That's why I make the point that I do about things in your ears. The question is, what would be the effect in terms of lives saved of banning lorries in the peak hours? And we need to dig into this a lot, and we need to work out how it would work. I want you to know I am not averse to the idea instinctively. We did a lot during the Olympics to try to move traffic off the roads during times when it was going to be congested. With Olympic traffic, there are lots of things we can do. I noticed, though, that I think of the cyclists, I think the most recent cyclists who perished, unfortunately, in collisions with HGVs, only a small number of them actually had their accidents in the peak period, as far as I can remember the statistics. So you wouldn't by any means solve the problem at a stroke. I think it was 2 out of 14 is the figure I have in my. Were actually during these peak hours in the morning. The gentleman who lost his life in Camberwell, for instance, most recently, that happened at noon. What you would also risk, I believe, is a great glut of lorries as soon as the peak was over, and they would also be in conflict with all other road users, and including cyclists and pedestrians in much greater numbers during that period. What is difficult, I think, is to imagine that we could somehow ban them altogether from London roads when they are needed for construction, they're needed to keep the economy going. What you can do is make them much safer. I will certainly look, and I don't want to rule it out, we are going to look at all the options and all the experiences of other cities. People talk a lot about what's going on, for instance, in Paris. Actually, in the greater Parisian area, they had 17 fatalities last year. That's more than us. There are no magic solutions to this. It is a question of engaging on all fronts, and not just with road infrastructure, that is important, not just with lorries, but also with trying to encourage sensible behaviour by cyclists and others.
But if you're not going to be able, in a practical way, to ban them during peak times, it does make the audio signals on heavy lorries, perhaps even on buses, even more important for the cyclist, does it not?
Yeah. So that's why we're consulting on it as part of the safer lorry zone. We are looking at that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Assembly Member Shawcross.
Chair. Mr Mayor, I want to follow up on John Biggs's point about cycling Superhighway 2. Across party, the Leeds on Transport Committee here have just met the London Cycling Campaign, and they basically advised us that you should now have over 10,000 emails in your inbox. London cycling community want you to respond very urgently and speedily on the specific problems of cycling Superhighway 2 and on the need to revisit and refit some sections of the cycling Superhighway network, because quite frankly they are confusing, they're weak, they very often let cyclists down just at the moment when they need need protection. Yeah. Now I think we all understand that the earlier infrastructure was more problematic, and that recent changes have been very positive and good, and there's been more segregation. But I think it's important that we all admit that cycling Superhighway 2 was substandard when it was installed, And actually, there is an urgent action plan from London Cycling Campaign. They want you to make some changes right away. What is your response to those?
Well, my response is that
Londoners?
obviously that we are always open to suggestions, and the whole road surface is in continual process of negotiation and improvement, obviously, and we're going to try to make Cycle Superhighway 2 and all the other cycle superhighways as safe as we possibly can. I've said to John what I've already said about the Bow Roundabout. If there's more we can do there, then we certainly should do that. I think most people would accept that the changes towards the Stratford end of CS2 are pretty remarkable. You can't, unfortunately, do that everywhere in town. I think what people need to understand about the cycle superhighways is that they're not going to provide a kind of invisible force field around cyclists that is going to protect them. But what they are there to do is to alert everybody that this is a place where you are going to find cyclists in large numbers, where you're going to have to pay attention to the road.
Confusion is one of the key issues here, isn't it? Because to use the phrase, people are being lulled into a false sense of security. And I think there's already been too many occasions when cyclists have actually had to go out and protest in large numbers to get things sorted out. Now, people have been protesting about Bow because they're doubly angry, because they did make very good suggestions, technical suggestions about how that roundabout could be improved and made safe, and actually they were pushed back, and the improvements were not good enough. We're not good enough.
Have you cycled
it?
Have you cycled
I've walked around it, Mr. Mayor. It's very difficult to walk around it because there's very few pedestrian crossings as well.
What you notice,
and the cyclists are telling us that they've had to do things like do mass demonstrations on the Blackfriars Bridge. There is plenty of good technical advice to be available to you, Mr. Mayor, available to TfL, to get these schemes right. The problem is you cannot prioritise smoothing the traffic flow.
But that's not true. It's completely untrue. We've taken huge amounts of time off motorists at Bow Roundabout. We've taken huge amounts of time, and we have actually done what the cycling group wanted, and we put in a cycle only traffic light. Now, what you cannot budget for is a decision by a cyclist not to use that lane or not to use that traffic light.
Are you telling me you're not going to respond positively to the London Cycling Campaign's specific requests about CS2 to do things like install immediate protected space for cycling at Aldgate Junction, to commit to installing cycling and pedestrian-specific lights across Bow Roundabout?
Well,
are you saying seriously that you think Cycling Superhighway 2 is good enough now? Because there's 10,000 people who've emailed you, Mr. Mayor, to tell you, to plead with you.
As I said, we're always willing to look at suggestions. We're always willing to make improvements where we can.
They want a commitment to action, Mr. Mayor.
I think you've heard.
On Cycling Superhighway 2.
We are acting across all cycle superhighways and will continue to act for the foreseeable future.
Thank you. Can I just remind people in the public gallery we do need to have this meeting in silence, so I won't allow interruptions from the public gallery. I know this is a heated topic, but we need silence if we are to properly hold the Mayor to account. Assembly Member Boff.
Mr. Mayor, one of the things I would urge you to do, if we can depart from the sort of, well, I sometimes think that one of the biggest obstacles to cycling safety is sometimes the rancorous negativity of Jenny Jones when it comes to this issue.
A false friend of cycling.
Even when she's got a point, she throws it away. I think and can I ask you that even though we, as you've accepted, even though we accept that the number of fatalities has reduced, that the actual KSIs has remained stubbornly the same, a little worse, a little better. It's actually stubbornly the same, and that needs to be addressing, because one of the expectations, I think, of the public is that safe cycling in London should get safer not just be capped at the current level. So I would ask you to attend to that.
Yeah.
And that you be driven by evidence.
Yes.
And that you don't
but I would ask everybody to be driven by evidence. And when the debate concerns cycle fatalities, as it has in the last fortnight, I think it would be a very good thing if the BBC carried loud and clear the information that over the last 5 years there have been fewer cycle fatalities on London's roads than there were in the previous 5 years, in spite of a massive increase in cycling. Now, whether that will be broadcast on the news or not, I have no idea. Who'd like to bet whether the BBC London News will actually carry that fact?
But it's not true, so
So I'm sorry. I'm sorry, it is true, Jenny.
no, it's not so.
If you want to,
it is true.
Assembly Member Jones, if you
I'm
want
sorry.
to come in for an additional exchange,
true.
you signal and I will bring you in at the appropriate moment.
What, that there have been fewer fatalities in the last 5 years than the previous
I
5
haven't
years?
finished yet.
It is true.
So,
It is true.
Can we?
I've given you the figures. I'll
The
give you them again.
exchange is with Assembly Member Bob.
I'll give you them
Assembly
again.
Member
If I may
Bob.
say,
I'll give you the figures again. You know, I really think they need to hear the figures again. And I'm going to...
Mr. Mayor, I'd appreciate it if you responded to my question
Yeah.
rather than Jenny Jones's intervention. And indeed, her intervention proves my comment earlier that actually that kind of behaviour gets in the way of improving cycling safety in London.
Okay.
Actually, the other groups have been relatively positive. Val Shawcross has been positive, John
agree.
Biggs has been
I agree.
positive, but we don't get this sort of irrational hysteria that we have from Lynn Jones. And it's annoying because there are some points that she's making, and that is that the KSIs have remained stubbornly at the same level.
Yeah.
And they need to be attended to.
That is absolutely right, Andrew.
And-
And that's why I've said everything that I've said about investment in the roads, why we're putting a £1 billion programme of transforming our road network, and why we are going to expand our efforts at education. One thing that I want us to do is to think about, particularly about new cyclists who are a little bit less confident, see what we can do to help them understand how to use the roads, how to be properly cautious, how to enjoy cycling in London. We're thinking about what we can proactively do as TfL to do that. But I really do want to, just because Len and co were disputing this, I have the figures again. I will repeat them. From 2008 to 2013, in other words, a 6-year period, there were 81 fatalities. 2002 to 2007, there were 102 fatalities. If you cut it another way, if you look at the years 2008 to 2012, there were 68 compared to 82 between 2003 and 2007. It's very difficult to look at the statistics in any other way. The number of deaths from cycling on London's roads has come down. And that is an astonishing thing when you consider that the number of cyclists on London's roads has gone up by 176%. And that is the context, I think, in which this whole debate needs to be viewed. That is not an easy point to get across. I've tried several times to get it across. I hope very much that every member of the Assembly will find that it's the first thing that springs to their lips when they're asked to comment on what is happening on the roads in London.
If I can just very quickly pass through 2 more points. Can we, first of all, again, I want to be evidence-based on anything you do, but I also respect that the public are concerned about accidents, collisions, and the fatalities that have resulted from those on CS2. And I think the public would want to see a review of CS2. I am not suggesting that you should instantly adopt everything the LCC tells you to adopt. That's not what we're about. But the public would want to see a review and be assured that you are reassuring them that action is being taken And so we would ask you to take that lobby from the LCC very seriously. My colleague Dick Tracy was on there, is supportive of that.
And I agree, and I'm grateful
that you would look.
I'm grateful to you, Andrew, for what you do to support cycling in London and the encouragement that you've given me over the last few years, and you've certainly been a very valuable advocate. And you are completely right in what you say. We need to continue to try to make all our cycle superhighways safer. I think that, again, insofar as you're going to have accidents, it is, I'm afraid, statistically quite likely that they will be at least in the vicinity of these major superhighways, because they tend to attract quite a large proportion of the traffic. We will certainly look at every incident very, very carefully to see what implications it may have for the road layout, for how it works, for the effect that the signals have on the cyclist, or on the impression they get of their safety or otherwise on a certain stretch of the road. Of course, we are looking at that the whole time. If we can review CS2 to make it completely perfect, that would be what I would want to do. But what we can't do, and as I know, and this is, and I really hope I won't be accused of blaming the victim if I say this, because I have no intention of doing that. But what we can't do is provide engineering of every inch of road surface in such a way as to guard against behaviour that is irrational and unexpected.
I take that point, Mr. Mayor, and I don't think that's really the basis of the request for the review. CS2 has raised questions in the past. Taking aside the fatalities, there's been questions raised about CS2. I've raised questions many years ago about it, about particular parts of it. It's not that I'm asking you instantly to change it according to how the LCC say you should change it. I'm saying that what we need is a review. And can you give an undertaking that there will be a review of CS2?
Yeah. Well, we are certainly upgrading CS2. We'll certainly be going through doing all the improvements we can possibly make to that superhighway and indeed others.
So that is an undertaking to give a review.
Well, it follows from everything I've said this morning, Andrew, that all our cycle superhighways are in a process of continuous review. So if that's the assurance you seek, then you've certainly got it.
That's not the assurance I seek. I know what you're. I know your reluctance to pick out one superhighway and say we're going to review this one, because it in some way gives some kind of credence to the narrative that in some way it is dangerous. But the public would want some reassurance on that CS2, and I think it's only fair that you can give that concession and say we will review CS2.
Well, we are reviewing CS2. I don't know. There's no point in saying we will review it. Well, we are reviewing it, and we will continue to review all cycle superhighways.
Assembly Member Cleverly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mayor, we've already seen this morning the reaction from some members to your response to a direct question about cyclists wearing headphones, and I'm very, very conscious that a period immediately after a series of terrible incidents like this is often the hardest time to have a dispassionate conversation, quite understandably so. In light of that, and so that we can all make our decisions and policy choices in an environment of hard fact, will you be willing to commission a small, discrete piece of statistical research done by a completely independent body, perhaps one of London's academic institutions, doing a bit of data analysis around the patterns of accident circumstances involving cyclists around London, not just the fatalities, those are important, not just the fatalities, but all. So we've got a large enough data set so we know accurately the proportion involving HGVs, the proportion involving cycle superhighways, primary, secondary roads, experienced cyclists, inexperienced cyclists, etc., because I think that will give us a strong factual basis on which we can have no party political divides about how to move forward on this issue.
Well, I'm not certain that certainly on all the fatalities, we've got now quite a wealth of information about, as far as we're able to assemble it, because sometimes the evidence will be confused, but we've got pretty good information about what has happened. And we study it. On the injuries, I'm less certain about exactly what data we have. I'm more than happy to share it with you.
Thank you. Would you be happy for me to contact Andrew Gilligan about progressing this piece of research? So I think it's very, very important.
I'm not saying I'm sure that lots of data already exists. I don't know what form I don't know whether it's ready for publication at the moment, but I'd be more than happy to share what we've got with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Assembly Member Biggs.
Thank you, Chair, and I think it is important that we come back on this. I think you are at risk of becoming captured by the bureaucracy of TfL. I have a report here, June 2013, casualties in Greater London during 2012, published by Transport for London, which tells us the number of fatal and seriously injured cyclists between the calendar year 2011 and 2012 rose by 18%, from 571 to 671 cyclists killed or seriously injured. Now that's a pretty significant increase, and that is a matter of record published by Transport for London. But we don't. But I don't want to quibble. I don't want you to.
Well, then don't quibble. If you don't want to quibble, then don't.
Let John Biggs finish his question.
This is a statement of fact, but I think the more important point is that we are signalling collectively, all the political groups in London, I think, are signalling that we want people to cycle in London. We've instated these things called superhighways, which give a signal to people that they will be safer and better treated than they would on other bits of highway. We're encouraging people to do these things, and when we have a piece of road like CS2, which is dangerous. It is dangerous. I argued in my team that we should suspend it, that we should argue it be suspended. They talked me out of this for a number of reasons, but it is dangerous. The roads are, the lanes are narrow. It's stressful for motorists as well as for cyclists because it's just not fit for a cycle superhighway. It's as simple as that, and you need to act really urgently. I have a meeting, a public meeting next Thursday, I think it is. I'd be very pleased if you came and spoke to that meeting and assured people.
I'm grateful to you, John, for the way obviously that you're pursuing this, and it's very important that we do what we can to make Cycle Superhighway 2 as safe as we possibly can, and that goes for all cycle superhighways. And we continue to invest in them. We continue to research the implications of each and every accident on those cycle superhighways to see what they might tell us about how we can do better. And I have to tell you that sometimes looking at some of the accidents on CS2, it is very hard to conclude what a traffic engineer could have done to obviate such a disaster. And sometimes it might be clearer. Sometimes there might be something that you could do.
Waiting to happen.
Well, you can say that, but as I say, I haven't heard you saying much in the last few days that cycle fatalities have come down over the last 5 years. I haven't heard members of the Assembly. I haven't heard it from Jenny. I haven't heard it from the BBC. I don't think I've heard a single person point out that actually your chances of dying on a cycle journey in London are lower now than they were 5 years ago and lower than they were 10 years ago. Has anybody said that? Has anybody from the Conservative group said that?
With respect,
Yes.
Chair, we have a duty of care, and that's not a sufficient answer.
I've not seen any other member wish to come in now on cycling. So are there any questions on any other aspects of the Mayor's oral update? No. Can we then move on to the questions on the order paper? But firstly, can I welcome representatives from the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region Civil Service to the Mayor's question time today? Welcome. And we then move to questions on the order paper.